Gracias por mi salud. Gracias.
It's the first time we've heard from Pope Francis since he was hospitalized. But, of course, it's also a reflection of the toll that this illness has taken on him. You can hear the frailty in his voice after spending 3 weeks in the hospital for what started out as a bad case of bronchitis and has since devolved into double pneumonia.
A lot of folks have been looking at the failing health of Pope Francis. Pope Francis, seen as a member of the liberal wing of the church, someone who's championed a number of issues that are in line with liberal causes, immigration, open border immigration, climate change, but has also stood for things like pro-life, has stood up against the idea of women being in the pulpit as priests, and also, by the way, is a vocal opponent of the Ukraine war and is constantly called for peace. Well, he's been in the hospital for weeks. On Ash Wednesday, he was not able to say Mass in the Vatican, was required to have a cardinal to replace him. And Roger has written an article about the potential process, should it occur, for selecting the next pope. Roger, when you apply the art of political prognostication or election prognostication to something like the papacy, is it much different from when you're looking at, say, a seat in Congress or a presidential race?
People tell you that the church or the military is not political, and of course they're entirely political, Jack. So let's look at the process. If the Pope goes on to meet his maker, you would have what is called a conclave. This is a gathering of all the popes from around the world, with the exception of those over 80. They are not permitted to vote. That is a significant setback for the more conservative elements of the church, but it's based on a rule that came out of Vatican II. So of the current College of Cardinals, 80% of them were chosen by Francis, who by any measure would have to be considered one of the most progressive popes in recent memory. Anyway, these elections, there's a cap, and the number can slightly differ, the cap on the number of votes. They meet in the Sistine Chapel. They're essentially locked in, and they keep balloting until they have one candidate with a majority. Each one of the cardinals writes the name of their chosen candidate on a slip of paper, folds it, places it in a chalice on the altar. The ballots are counted by 3 scrutineers, and to win, a candidate needs 2/3 a majority of the votes. If nobody gets a majority, those ballots are burned with a chemical that smokes black, and therefore the smoke you see rising from the roof of the Sistine Chapel is black, means they do not yet have a pope. Only when they have a pope do they use a different chemical mix, and the smoke is white. The words habemus papam, meaning we have a pope, is announced from the balcony. Now you look at the jockeying. Here we go. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, 70, of Italy. He's the Vatican's Secretary of State. Parolin may be the current frontrunner, if there is one. He's a moderate with extensive diplomatic experience. He's viewed kind of as a continuum of the current pope, although he has some controversial dealings, such as the Vatican's agreement with China, that could complicate his candidacy. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle of the Philippines, known as the Asian Francis. He's, again, a leader of the progressive wing of the church, and he follows the current pope's pastoral approach. My sources tell me that he'd be the worst and probably the most left-wing of the choices. Cardinal Matteo Zuppi of Italy, another favorite of Pope Francis. Zuppi is president of the Italian Episcopal Conference and a moderate known for his social justice advocacy. Cardinal Fridolin Ambrogo Basungi of the Congo. He's a strong conservative voice. I guess in a perfect world, he'd probably be my first choice. He's a terrific long shot. Remember, Jack, that 80% of these voters were appointed by the current Pope. Cardinal Wim Ejik, a former doctor, another conservative, known for actually opposing Francis's views on marriage and abortion, marriage and divorce. His traditionalist stance would appeal to some cardinals to rebalance current reforms, but he, again, is a long shot. Cardinal Raymond Burke of the United States, an American traditionalist. Burke has clashed with Francis on issues like marriage, the Eucharist, same-sex marriage. He's a long shot, but he represents a more conservative vocal faction. My sources think Burke would launch major reforms to strengthen the church until young Catholics who are overwhelmingly conservative are ready to take the helm. Then there's Cardinal Peter Erdo of Hungary, 72, a conservative canon lawyer respected for his adherence to church doctrine and his kind of low-profile approach. He, again, would attract some moderate and conservative votes to the extent that there are conservative votes. Remember, the current Pope appointed 80% of the electorate in this particular election. And then, of course, there's Cardinal Mario Grish of Malta. He is the Secretary General of the Synod of Bishops. He's a Francis appointee with an extremely progressive bent, emphasizing dialogue with marginalized groups. So if I had my pick, I would take Cardinal Robert Serra of Guinea. He'd be my first choice. He's a staunch conservative, a defender of the faith in the church, believes in borders, believes in the rules of the West. We really couldn't do better than Cardinal Robert Serra of Guinea.
So, Roger, when for folks that aren't even familiar with the way the College of Cardinals works, for the understanding of them, to be able to be voted on at all, one must be a member of the Cardinals. And so this is your highest rung of the prelates of the church, other than the papacy itself. From those ranks, someone must be chosen. It doesn't have to be a cardinal, but it is generally a cardinal. And I believe one of the requirements is that they must be under 80 years old.
That is one of the great disadvantages. It's one thing to say that the Pope should be under 80, but to deny a vote among the cardinals for those cardinals who are over 80 years, this makes no sense to me. In fact, somebody who's 80 years old would be very wise. That's someone you would want voting. We had a president, Ronald Reagan. He was 80 when he left office. He was among our greatest presidents. I think Donald Trump is 77. Why would you exclude those over 80 unless, of course, it's politics, which is what this is about?
Well, that's right. And this is a new, so basically the idea is then that creates basically a quorum of people who were not appointed by previous popes, so Benedict or any of the John Paul II cardinals, if they're still around, that they wouldn't be able to participate in the voting. And then it sets itself up in such a way where Francis essentially is sort of giving the inside track to his own successor. Do you believe that Pope Francis has picked a successor?
My guess is he probably has. I mean, look, it's disappointing because, Jack, like you, when I was raised in the church, it was a bulwark of anti-communism. I watched, Father Fulton Sheen on WPIX in New York growing up. That Catholic Church does not seem to exist except for in certain parishes, and outspoken conservatives like Bergano and others are actually excommunicated when they disagree with this Pope. Now, I've seen this Pope say that the Bible specifically says that Jesus Christ was opposed to private property rights. That's not true. That's false. So look, the Bible is a practical document. I didn't always know this. I know it today, and it can be read for its literal word. But some of the things that have been projected onto it are shocking. Yes, as Catholics, we have to have a concern for the poor. But in both the Old Testament and the New, hard work is highly prized. Self-enterprise and self-responsibility, these are also enumerated in the Bible. You wouldn't know it from this Pope.